right, welcome back, everyone. Let's see, we got the chat up. So I have my computer on the side today, camera in front of me. So if you see me looking to the right, like it just means I'm reading your comments. So just FYI, let me get caught up a bit. All right, so we have some questions left over from last week I wanted to get to first. First was from Josh Young. He asked, do we know if the Hemp high altitude electromagnetic pulse is a real... Pause me 1 sec. I gotta expand my screen. Sorry about that. All right. Do we know if the Hemp high altitude electromagnetic pulse is a real possibility of a threat? If so, what is our defense of this? Okay, so a bit of background on this. The Chinese, all right, so first off, what is Hemp? What is a Hemp attack? Hemp attack is high Earth orbit electromagnetic pulse. It's basically a conceptual military attack using the detonation of a nuclear weapon in low Earth orbit or high Earth orbit. To basically use the electromagnetic pulse from the nuclear detonation to destroy a country's technology, electronic systems, you name it. This was observed as one of the side effects of a atomic blast, that it fries electronic systems. Basically, if you're dealing with the amount of voltage or surge electronics can take, it's limited. And so that high energy surge all of a sudden just destroys electronics. When it comes to the CCP's military strategy on this, they talk about using attacks like this. The only document I've personally seen that's direct on this was an early on US, I think it was a US Army document analyzing the Chinese Communist Party's, what they call the Assassin's Maze program, also translated as the Trump card program. And this is basically their unconventional, surprise attack strategy. We talk about unrestricted warfare. If China launched an actual military attack, it would take the form of this, which is their Assassin's Maze program. You can find mentions of it in books such as Michael Pillsbury's 100-Year Marathon. A lot of defense experts have written about it. The main document where the Hemp attacks are discussed was from an Army document. I believe it was back in like the late 90s. I want to say 97, but I might have the date wrong. It was declassified in the 2000s. So I want to say around 2011, something like that. Yeah, you have to forgive me, I'm bad with dates. If you really want to find it, you can find it linked on some of the articles I've done about the Assassin's Base program going back to like 2014, 2015. Now, in terms of how this would work and why they would do it. Okay, so the basic assessment with Chinese military attacks, if the CCP were to launch an attack on the West, again, Assassin's Mace is how they say they would do it. And it's basically a rapid surprise attack meant to destroy the basic capabilities that enable us to fight. So satellite systems, electronic systems, communication systems, doing direct assassinations, for example, of, say, specialists, destroying landing pads at major landing strips for military bases, destroying the landing strips of the aircraft carriers. In other words, disabling the U.S. ability to, say, launch fighter jets, to have GPS for targeting systems, have satellites for communication systems, and to at the same time launch an attack internally inside the U.S. that would cripple the nation. That's the idea of it. Sorry, I'm just following the attack, or the not the attacks, following the chats. So hopefully no attacks today. Yeah, DEW. I'll get into direct energy weapons, Abe. Some of you guys talking about that. And so, yeah, back to Hemp attacks. Now, there have been different assessments on the vulnerability of the U.S. critical infrastructure. I'm sorry if I'm using technical terms. The vulnerability of like the U.S. electric grid against attacks like this. Now, a lot of the conservatives, a lot of the Republicans have been more hawk-like when it comes to the threat of directed energy weapon. I'm not directed energy. I'll get into that in a minute. A lot of conservatives, a lot of Republicans have been more concerned about the electromagnetic pulse threat to the U.S. electric grid. It's been mostly the Democrats who've blocked legislation to try to fix the electronic system for this. One of the main points they use is that a lot of the people who cite the estimates on the amount of harm it would cause within the country, a lot of times conservatives will cite a book that was fiction. It was not a real assessment. But a lot of defense experts also cite that book mainly because the assessment is pretty accurate. And it's done using pretty credible methods. Basically, it estimates that within a short period of time, I want to say like half a year, they estimate about 90% of the population in the US would die from a hemp attack if you destroyed the electric grid. And that's based on food shortages, lack of medical facilities, and so on. If they were to launch an attack like that, they would do it during rush hour, in major cities. So you create, a lot of cars, basically, even cars work with very small electronic systems, right? What are your circuit breakers, right? If you go into your circuit breaker panel, you're dealing with electronic systems. Most cars these days, I mean, really going back decades now, an EMP attack would disable them as well. That's the assessment. And so imagine then if you launch an attack at rush hour, freeways are disabled, emergency systems are disabled, communications are disabled, transportation is disabled, all the electronic systems are disabled, people can't get information, there's no communication, people panic, you have things fall into chaos, and the ability of reestablishing communications networks and so on would be difficult. At the same time, you would simultaneously have many other layers of attacks from China under the unrestricted warfare doctrine. That and the Assassin's Maze program, including, for example, what they call shoot and scoot tactics, kind of like Mumbai attack type things where you have terrorists launching attacks in major cities. They've talked about this. Direct attacks on U.S. military facilities, so on. So I won't go into the whole thing. Now, again, the assessment of the damage of this is, the conservatives more often are concerned about the threat of directed energy weapons. Sorry, I'll get into that in a minute again. Conservatives are usually more concerned about electromagnetic pulse against the electric grid than Democrats are. Democrats typically have blocked legislation to create, safeguards on that. And to create safeguards on that, just answering the question from Josh Young, you would basically need to put you would need to put breakers between the different parts of the electric grid, so that if a surge began in one area, it would not surge through the entire electric grid, because it would hit one area and they would travel across the whole country. Basically, if you launched, high Earth orbit detonation over the center of America, presumably the EMP blast would spread through the electric grid itself because there's a surge and fry the whole country, essentially, anything connected to it. And so people who talk about fixing it, if it can be fixed, talk about putting breakers along the way to prevent the surge from spreading if that were to happen. Typically, Republicans want to do that. Typically, Democrats are the ones who block it. Now, would that work? Who knows? I mean, honestly, when it gets to that level, a lot of, it's mixed. It's partisan depending on who you're listening to. China, though, yes, they do talk about this, and I do personally think it's a real threat. One sec. Brandon Heat, really appreciate the donation. Thank you. Next question. I want to get to two more, then we'll jump into today. But Alexandre Briere asked, and thank you for the donation as well. And I know a few of you have asked it as well, so I want to get to this. Yes, what was left out of my question? What is your take on the UN, WEF, WHO? I know you are tired. I am curious. When it comes to the United Nations, WHO, and so on, basically, so Epoch Times had actually published an investigative infographic on the leadership of a lot of organizations within the United Nations, which includes the WHO. And the Chinese Communist Party has leadership positions in most of these organizations. They're not, in my opinion and my assessment based on this, a lot of them are not independent. Now, if you become a leader of a branch of the United Nations, you're supposed to you're basically supposed to no longer follow the nationalist guidelines of your home country. And so if you're, for example, a Chinese official who becomes a UN official, you're no longer supposed to basically serve the Chinese Communist Party. Now, those who have broken away from that have been punished by the CCP. And so people who have tried to uphold that within their roles at the UN, under China, have been punished by them. We can look at, just as one example, of the head of the, what's that glorified world police? Interpol, right? International Police. The head of Interpol was a Chinese official, and the CCP punished him. There, basically, yeah. If you're Chinese, if you're part of the CCP and you go and work with one of these organizations, you have to serve the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. You are not independent. And a lot of these organizations, the U.S. cut ties with the WHO under the assessment that the WHO is not independent, that the WHO is serving the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. We saw the same thing with the Human Rights Council at the United Nations. One individual, Alex Newman, he is an independent journalist, actually a really good investigative journalist. He's a freelancer, writes sometimes for Epoch Times. I need to get him on this show now I think of it. But he wrote an article for the Epoch Times, actually, about a case that happened in the United Nations. There was a group, I might have mentioned it previously. Forgive me if you heard this already. There was a group of people from China who were coming to speak to the Human Rights Council of the UN. Now, the United Nations took their names, provided the list of names to the CCP, and the CCP arrested them. One of them died in custody. These were people who were going to testify about human rights abuses, and the Human Rights Council at the United Nations provided their names to the CCP, and they were arrested for it. One of them died in custody again. What did the UN do afterwards? It punished the whistleblower. The person was a woman who warned about this, believed that, doing so would actually be a good thing. The United Nations punished her. They have an internal tribunal system where they deal with issues like this. And so in my assessment, the United Nations basically just serves the interests of Russia, Iran, CCP. I don't think the U.S. gets much out of it, to be honest, other than maybe some degree of international diplomacy. Maybe not. And really, a lot of its functions are the opposite of what they're supposed to be serving. It works basically as a system that the CCP has subverted to gain influence over global politics. That's what it's become. Now, that's not to say they're all bad. That's not to say they're all subverted, but the CCP has put in a lot of effort to subvert different parts of it. And a lot of it has been accused of that based on what they've been doing. It's my assessment. Real quick, I know a few of you asked about directed energy weapons, including one individual from last week. I can't find the comment now. Let me just talk briefly about that. Yeah, so the CCP does have directed energy weapons. Now, people have talked about, okay, so when you get into directed energy weapons, you're dealing with two different categories. You're dealing with sonic weapons, and you're dealing with electromagnetic weapons, electromagnetic field. In other words, you're dealing with the spectrums of sound, and you're dealing with the spectrums of light. Now, you might remember the different reports saying that U.S. Diplomat staff and consulate staff, I believe in Cuba, were hit with sonic weapons, allegedly from China. And there was a lot of stories about that. A lot of people doubted it was actually happening, doubted it was possible. But, reports came out later that, China actually does have these kinds of weapons. That same Army document I had talked about previously, again, I believe it's from like 1997, so the information is pretty outdated. But the document on the Assassin's Mace program, one of the only public documents I know of in terms of original sources, they actually do talk about experiments in China on directed energy weapons. And, this isn't sci-fi. Let me just give a couple examples of this. The U.S., for example, has flyover airstrike capabilities publicly demonstrated using, for example, targeted EMP attacks. There have been videos assessing, the capabilities of it, where they can, for example, target a single building in a single city and knock out just the electronics within that single building. It's to that level. They have riot control systems, for example, that use microwave energy. The U.S. has them. China has them. They use them for crowd control. I don't think they've ever deployed them that I know of, but they do have them. There's a great video, actually, if you want to watch, of these things being tested. It was in the U.S., and they let a journalist, try it out and stand within its range. The person, basically, you see him just start jumping and get out of its range. It says it makes you feel just extremely uncomfortable. Now, getting back to this, and also, the Chinese military also has these laser rifles. Again, you're dealing with directed energy weapons, these laser rifles. And I know it sounds sci-fi, but they have public reports on it. You can find videos of it. This isn't make-believe. That can set targets on fire. For example, they do have these weapons. They've demonstrated them. They're public. They've shown them off. They make a big deal about them. These are troop-carried weapons, so these absolutely do exist. Um, Now, when it comes to the unrestricted warfare, I'm sorry, I keep talking about that one. When it comes to the Assassin's Mace program and that one document I was talking about early on, U.S. Army assessment, one of the things they detailed was Chinese experiments on these types of weapons, and they're very disturbing. So it talks, for example, about how they're testing them on living subjects and animals in this case. And they're talking about how these weapons will affect like the eyeballs of animals, and yeah, I won't get into detail, but they do test these things. They have tested them, and they're pretty horrifying. Now, a lot of people are asking about directed energy weapons because people believe that in California and these fires that people may be using directed energy weapons. I mean, could I prove that? No. Have I seen evidence of that? No. I have seen the pictures of some of these fires where you have lots of homes, and the homes are destroyed and burned down and none of the trees are burned down. I think it's pretty suspicious. Could we prove, directed energy weapons were used? I don't think we could. I can tell you that with these fires now, I know people call it conspiracy theory. If you talk about arson, there have been people arrested for arson. It's not, maybe some of these are natural, but look, some people have been arrested for arson. You can't say that they're all natural. So it's a bit of both, possibly. I know I've also interviewed in the past, off record, police officers in California who, I mean, this was I think 2 years ago now, a year or two ago. I can't, my sense of time's all messed up from this virus. Um, Arrested an individual, for example, in California who was driving around and throwing flares out his window. And my point with this is, if you wanted to start fires, you wouldn't have to try that hard. You just drive through Southern California along the freeway and toss flares out your window. You'll start plenty. It's not that hard. It's not hard. Let's put it that way. I don't think you need some advanced technology to do it. And there have been cases of this, people doing this. Does it mean they're all like this? No. I mean, I don't think we could prove that, but we can say for a fact that some of them have been started like this. And I think it's fair to say that based on cases, based on arrests, that some have been arson. Maybe some are started naturally as well. Of course, I think that's normal as well. If you were to ask me what the real problem is, I'd say it's the fact that the different environmental regulations tend to cause more problems than they fix, because they don't clear underbrush. They don't do controlled burns. They don't have basic systems in place to make sure that fires like this don't happen. It's why you don't have fires like this in Canada right across the border. It's because they do controlled burns and they do stuff like that. If you would ask me, that's the real problem. It's government policy allowing things to get out of hand, overgrowth on untended land. I think that's the real problem, personally. And a few crazies as well. You deal with that too. Oh wow. Ample Fourth, appreciate the donation. Thank you. Say, many political commentators these days claim that current anti-CCP rhetoric are simply pro-Trump political propaganda, and that China is just being nationalistic. What do you say? I'd say that the anti-CCP narrative is no longer Trump, Biden. Trump. It's bipartisan now. Democrats, their policy dealing with China is actually pretty decent. The latest one they did, talking about investing in U.S. manufacturing. Now, would Biden be hardline on the CCP? It's hard to say. I don't want to sound partisan, but he does have some pretty close ties to the CCP financially. There have been a lot of reports on this. It's not just saying that. Now, would he be? I mean, keep in mind too, Trump was a businessman. He was building, of course, in his normal job, he was doing major construction projects in many parts of the world. Just because he has deals doesn't mean that he's biased, doesn't mean he's gonna, favor those countries over the US. And so maybe Biden, despite having made deals, maybe he would be okay too. But again, who knows? It does seem that some of the deals he's being accused of having were more the under the table type. But when it comes to politics, surface level politics, Trump administration, Biden, Democrats more so, Angela Merkel in the EU, Britain, India, you name it. This is no longer a partisan issue. Taking a hard stance on the CCP is no longer a partisan issue. We see this across the board, Democrats, Republicans. And so I personally don't think this is, again, a partisan issue. I don't want to keep repeating that, but all right, let's see. I can't pronounce your name. ZZYZX Trump. Hey, thank you for the donation. I appreciate it. Cal Hance Johns. Appreciate the donation as well. Some say that Trump can't ban. Let me a second. Let me get a drink real quick. I got some kombucha today. I swear I'm not a hippie, but I brew my own kombucha. So, all right. Yeah, appreciate it as well. Thank you. You say some say that Trump can't ban TikTok now, or young voters will be upset. But TikTok won't sell its algorithm either, which is what Trump wants. What should U.S. do about this? Well, I mean, is it really selling it if they can't sell the algorithm? You either sell it or you don't sell it. That's what it comes down to. And also being able to understand what's under the hood of TikTok is one of the big things the U.S. is going to have to look at. And why do they not want people to see that? I'd say maybe it's two different. There's two concerns in that. Not saying they've done this. Two concerns in that. One is that they're going to open up the lids, so to speak, and they're going to find that there's code in there that allows spying by the CCP. Number two would be that they open it up and they find that there's code in there based on the algorithm that was stolen from like Twitter or something like that, or stolen from another big tech company. So, they would, if they're going to sell it, if they're going to deal with the security issues of that company, they're going to need to show what's in it. And that's just part of the package. I don't think Trump is going to let them keep going if they don't agree to full transparency, personally. In terms of reaching young voters, it's iffy. I mean, I was going to joke and say I don't know if TikTok users be voting Trump, but I do know some good conservative kids, for conservative families who use TikTok, and they're conservative. They use TikTok. Personally, I think TikTok is leaving a trail of cringe that will follow you later in life. But let them figure that out themselves, I guess. I'm just joking. Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see. Of course, the latest news on this is a judge blocked the ability to forbid downloads on WeChat. I don't know if TikTok was involved in that. I didn't see it mentioned. But I do think Trump can go forward with this with or without losing voters. It's one interesting thing about Trump, actually, is he's breaking from party conventions. And the reason I say this is, for example, when you deal with trade and business, I mean, a lot of these big businesses, the Republican Party used to be the party of big business, oil, and war. That's how a lot of people perceived it. And Trump is not doing these things, which is why the old guard Republicans like George Bush and so on, they're aligning with Biden. A lot of you call them rhinos, fair enough. I think the nature of the Republican Party has changed, actually. Trump has turned it into a different party because he doesn't play party politics, which is interesting to watch, actually. And when you're dealing with business interests with China, really, he goes against a lot of it. My point in saying this is that you would think that he wouldn't do some of these things because you would think it would fracture his base or turn people within his own party against him, or risk losing voters. But it seems to be the opposite. It doesn't seem to have done that. Instead, he seems to have changed the culture of the Republican Party, and it's a very different party than it was under Bush. My point in saying this is I think he would go forward with the ban even if it meant some younger voters being unhappy with it. And I mean, we'll have to see. Again, some people are probably pretty unhappy about their TikTok being banned, especially their big followings. But how many does that impact? Who knows? This is from Co. I appreciate the donation. Thank you. Glendale, California, HSBC, again, caught allowing money to be laundered through their system, funding terrorism, etc. Will U.S. stop that great show? To be honest, I haven't read that story, but I will look into it. Thank you for letting me know. One sec. Next from EO2 Dave. I appreciate the donation. Thank you as well. Do you think that after the election, Trump will take retaliation against the CCP for their crimes against humanity? I mean, he might do it before the election. It seems to be the global trend right now, actually. And I think it's interesting. I've said it before that the weakest point of the Chinese Communist Party is its human rights abuses, and its weakest point as well is also the the support it has or lack of support it has from the Chinese people. Because you can be a government, right? You can be a government at your podium with your mouthpiece, and you only have authority to the extent that people carry out your orders. If people no longer recognize your authority or carry out the things of your authority, are you really in power? And so the CCP understands that if the identity of the CCP is separated from that of the Chinese people, which is something I always say, I try to make a clear distinction between the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese people. That is its weakest link. Because the CCP and all of its propaganda and everything it does, it tries to latch its own identity onto the Chinese people, when in reality, the Chinese Communist Party is the main persecutor of the Chinese people. Through different campaigns, it has acted to destroy their culture, their traditional belief, everything that made them who they are, right? The Cultural Revolution, it was an act to destroy 5,000 years of culture, history, literature, academia, religion, you name it. They said that if you walked around China before that, you dig 5 feet under the ground and you'd find some cultural relic. There'd be a wall by your house that could be thousands of years old, and you passed it by without a thought. These things were destroyed by the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, the crime it committed in the cultural destruction of the Chinese people in itself is something horrific. And I think if the Chinese people were to realize that the Chinese Communist Party has targeted them, their identity, their history, and everything they were, and aim to destroy that they will understand that this is a regime that does not represent them. And I think that once that, and not only that, but KIT continues its abuses against them, I think if they see that, really, that is going to be the end of the CCP's ability to exert authority within China. I think this is why they censor the internet. I think this is why they're so aggressive with messaging. I think it's why they try to control media outlets and control academics and control what can or cannot be said. It's why if you have a little protest of some students and parents in Inner Mongolia, the Chinese Communist Party will send in the military. Any little amount of people standing up against it is, as far as the CCP is concerned, detrimental to their ability to hold power. That fear, right? The fear they have of even the smallest amount of dissent, right? Even the smallest amount of people opposing it or voicing discontent with what it does is a demonstration of how weak its ideology is. That's a demonstration of how weak its lies are. And it's also, I think, a show that it understands that is its weakest point. That's its biggest vulnerability. And so again, I think Trump would go after them on this, and I think he has been. And hopefully it's a trend that continues. And not only Trump, but now we see a lot of other countries stepping forward as well. Even the EU, which has tended to be pretty close to the CCP in the past. Even Australia, which is pretty close to them for a long time, they're taking stronger and stronger stances. I do think this is going to be a momentum that's going to keep building. Next up, we have Miranda Price. I really appreciate the donation. Thank you. And wow, Christina Richardson, I really appreciate it. Thank you. For your consideration, 2 books. Forbidden Memory, Tibet During the Cultural Revolution includes rare pictures from a former CCP that participated and also, quote, meltdown in Tibet, what the CCP has done to the sacred land. And yeah, actually, I mean, we don't hear much out of Tibet currently. I've talked to Tibetan human rights activists. Even for them, I've been told it's very hard for them to get information out. Even recently, some of the destruction of temples, not just in Tibet, but across China, they've been ramping this up again. It's actually, I've been meaning to do an episode just on this. There's a great website called Bitter Winter, and I believe it's run by House Christians. I might be wrong, but they do some great work on the CCP's human rights abuses targeting religions. The Chinese Communist Party has been destroying folk temples all across China. I mean, it looks like scenes out of the Cultural Revolution. They've been going beyond that now, and I did mention this a bit in a previous episode, but they're even converting some of the folk temples now into temples worshiping Mao Zedong and other top CCP leaders. You see statues of Communist Party leaders like their gods in these temples. I mean, This kind of stuff to me is horrifying. I mean, yeah. I mean, people have talked about the Chinese Communist Party is basically functioning like an evil cult. And a lot of people take that as the reason why they go and persecute all the, upright beliefs, why people believing in morals that are opposed to what it does, why it's so aggressive in trying to stamp out belief. It's because the CCP functions like an evil cult. You're not allowed to leave it. You have to pay your dues. You have to follow its ideology. You can't say anything against it. You have to join its weekly study sessions, you name it. In any kind of dissent, any kind of show of belief anywhere else, they attack it. Actually, the Epoch Times published a book you might all be interested in, which is also a documentary film series called The 9 Commentaries on the Communist Party. And it is a commentary, it's opinion, or op-ed, opinion editorial. But it really shows the history of the CCP, what it's done to the Chinese people, and it has a whole section on how the Chinese Communist Party is an evil cult. Actually, it's very interesting. Highly recommend it. Let me get the website for you all real quick. But yeah, you'll like it. Let me see. I look goofy right now, but yeah, go to 9commentaries.com if you're interested. The book is free. There's a video series. There's also a podcast you can listen to. And that book actually started in China what's called the Tweedong movement, or the Quit the Party movement. And let me pull that up real quick too, because this is something no one talks about. One sec. So Tweedong, Tuidang. Go to en.tweedong.org. And the 9 commentaries started this movement. 364 million people and counting have quit the Chinese Communist Party, the Youth League, and the Young Pioneers, its affiliated organizations. There's a quiet revolution taking place in China as we speak that gets almost no media coverage. And unfortunately, a lot of academics and journalists and experts, they don't believe it's real. But when you quit the CCP, basically you can go on this website or talk to individuals. They have volunteers making phone calls into China around the clock. And they even have like automated call record systems where it's like press 1 to quit the Communist Party, and then you record a statement of why you're quitting. Or people again send in their resignation. Every resignation has a small note on why they're quitting the CCP, and they publish them. And so, yeah, 364 million people have submitted these. Does it mean that 364 million people have really quit the CCP and its affiliates? Maybe some are doubles, maybe some are false, who knows? But that is a lot of people, and it does seem to be legitimate. Yeah, and I've actually interviewed, not on this show, but previously through Epoch Times, I've interviewed some of the main people involved in that, and it's an incredible operation. Volunteer run, amazing stuff. And this is happening right under everyone's noses. There's a quiet moral revolution taking place in China. I almost feel bad calling it a revolution. It's more like a moral awakening taking place in China that nobody's talking about. And these are individuals oftentimes that previously using fake names. These days, a lot of them even use their real names. Across the board, even top-level Communist Party officials. But again, it's Communist Party members quitting. And so these are not just any people in the country. These are the influencers in the country. This is happening as we speak. Nobody talks about it. But this is the disintegration of the CCP from within China itself. And it's the Chinese people basically just saying, I see the CCP for what it is, and I no longer want to be a part of it. Even though they cannot technically leave it, they have to keep giving their party dues, or they're going to face persecution. Ideologically, in their hearts, they are no longer part of it. And this is a massive force of change in China that I think is really changing the country from within. Next question. Ram Cecilent. Sorry, I'm bad with these names sometimes. Appreciate the donation. Thank you. He said there were leaked documents at the start of the riots from the CCP tells all Chinese in the USA to cause as much problems as possible. How much do you personally think they have interfered? I do think the CCP is involved based on reports. And now let me explain how I see these riots in the US. I do think there's a grassroots side of it. I do think there are I'd say the majority of people who are out on the street protesting probably do have legitimate grievances, or they just watch too much mainstream media. Or I mean, being fair, I mean, a lot of people believe there are problems with our, law enforcement system, and they do follow these narratives. They do believe in this whole race narrative thing. And so I think a lot of people legitimately have gone out to protest for legitimate reasons because they actually believe in it. I respect their opinions. I view it differently because I've seen different data on policing. I think actually getting rid of police is going to hurt, you know, poorer communities worse than, trying to disband them. I think it's going to cause more problems. And I think we're already seeing that. I think getting rid of the police is the last thing these people need. When it comes to areas where you have a lot of violence, and looking at New York the way it's gone, that's the last thing we need. Now, more training, great. I know, for example, in some areas, I'm from San Diego. Riverside Police, for example, they have amazing training. You deal with some areas, they have incredible training. Some areas, not so much. So, fair enough. There are some parts of the U.S. where they could have better training systems, better requirements. That you do have that issue. But personally, I think that, there are people who see issues, fair enough. I think it's totally fair that they voice their opinions. At the same time, there are groups that have subverted it. You do have Antifa, which is really a far left, anarchist, communist organization. And a lot of people think when you talk about far left, far right, they confuse anarchy and communism and all these things. Now, if you go back, all right, I don't want to go on a whole history tangent, but let me go into this a little bit. There's a great book called Anarchy and Anarchists, and it was written after the bombing of Wall Street, late 1800s, I believe. I have a copy of it on my desk at the office. It's an incredible book detailing the history of anarchist insurrection in the United States related to the communist revolution. And the same thing that happened in the late 1800s with these anarchist groups advocating for communism, and I'll get into how they relate. The same thing that was happening then is happening now, almost to the T. If I were to read to you articles written at that time, which these books have, and which you can still find online, the bombing of Wall Street, some of the other incidents, if I were to read the stories to you and not tell you the time of the incident, you could just as easily believe it is happening right now, because it's the exact same ideology, the exact same messaging, the exact same demands, some of the exact same organizations through parent organizations leading into what you have now. Exactly the same. People going into communities, burning down towns and cities. This went on for a course of many years. I want to say like close to a decade, before it eventually turned into actual terrorist attacks, resulting in the bombing of Wall Street, which is one of the more famous attacks in this. Now, how does communism relate to communism? How does anarchy relate to communism? Sorry. We can look back to the original anarchists like William Godwin. He was the father of Mary Shelley, who was the author of Frankenstein. William Godwin was a creepy guy. As a small tangent, actually, he was really into, he was an atheist, a very radical atheist, and he was a very influential atheist of his time. His wife was one of the original feminists. Actually, the books, when her journal was released and it demonstrated what a terrible life she led, it actually derailed the feminist movement for a long time because people saw how miserable she was. I won't get into the whole history of that. William Godwin was a radical atheist. One of his beliefs was, one of his personal interests was in necromancy. Not saying I believe in these things, but just talking about history. He wrote a book, History of the Necromancers. And his belief was basically, I'm going on a small tangent, but hear me out, just because it's kind of just showing his character. His belief, being an atheist, was that if you destroy a person's body, and if there's no such thing as a soul, then what constitutes life? Presumably, if there's no soul, if you repair a body to the state that would sustain life, presumably life should be restored to it. And so, he was interested in researching these things. And, the history of that led into even early organ transplant experiments in Russia. You might have seen these creepy videos, for example, where they did, head transplants of dogs and, reanimating organs. They're horrifying videos of this stuff. That led into modern organ transplants, actually. The idea was trying to prove that there's no soul. That was the idea of that. Now, interestingly, Mary Shelley, author of Frankenstein, her book was influenced by this stuff because the idea of reanimating, this Frankenstein, was tied to her father's, experiments and research on these things. She had a nightmare one night where a reanimated corpse was standing over her bed, and that was the influence she had for writing Frankenstein. Now, getting into I'm on a tangent now, but getting into the right, Frankenstein was called the Prometheus, and that goes into the theosophy, Luciferian, Prometheus, naturist groups that were popular at that time. They talked about these things. I could go into this for hours, honestly, but let me get back to the point. I mean, I did a 3-part series for Epoch Times. Anyone's interested in reading this? It was called The Dark History of Communism, where I do go into naturism, Luciferian origins. I don't remember if I got into the whole thing they talk about the Prometheus. They compare Lucifer to the Prometheus, being that this knowledge is being the gift from God, that so on and so on. I won't get into their whole ideology. It's the cult of man, right? That's what communism is. It's a cult of man. It's the belief in human reason over quote unquote superstition and belief, and the idea of destroying the creations of God, or leading man in the destruction of these things. One interesting thing about Marxism, a lot of people misinterpret it. Unfortunately, I think a lot of conservatives, they only debate Marxism within the boundaries of economy, when in reality it was a metaphysical theory. It was about metaphysics and ontology, right? It was a theory on the nature of life and existence. If you all, just real quick, you want to find examples of this? All right. Thomas Molnar's Perennial Heresy, Utopia, the Perennial Heresy. I have the book here, but down the cover on it. Get into Ludwig von Mises, Socialism. He gets into the whole ideology of these things as well. Highly recommended. Ludwig von Mises, Socialism. He gets into that. A lot of guys have gotten into it. I mean, you can talk about as well. For example, Carl Jung, in his Red Book, for example. I could do a whole thing on Carl Jung. He was an interesting character as well. This was the book that worked as the basis for formulating all of his later research. The Red Book, it wasn't released until recently. But if you read Aeon, he talks about the ontology of communism as well. A lot of these individuals have gone into this. It was in the early stage of these things. This was part of the general discussions and debates around it. People understood it was not just an economic theory. Anyways, I'm getting way off topic, so let me get back to what I was talking about. Right. Yeah, you were asking about the leaked documents about the Chinese Communist Party. Yes. So let me get to the point of this, and then I'll move on. Let me get a drink. Okay, so where were we? William Godwin, anarchy. And so the idea of anarchy as it related to communism, let me explain that. Let me go deeper into it. Actually, on this note, this bookshelf here, history of communism and every freaky ideology that influenced it, including early heresies, you name it. I've researched the heck out of this stuff. Disturbing writings going very far back, hundreds of years, and I've read quite a bit of this stuff. Yeah. So, anyways, William Godwin, communism, anarchy. How do they relate? Now, the idea of that William Godwin promoted was the idea of achieving what he called intentional communism through personal anarchy. And this is something significant that ties into the real nature of communism, actually, which is it's not just an economic theory. Again, now Marx talked about, for example, Das Kapital. What does he talk about in Das Kapital? Half the book is his criticism of the current economic system. The other half, the later half, sorry, the later half gets into his utopian vision, where ironically, even though he criticizes all the means of production and the factories and everything else, and I'm sorry, I know see a lot of you giving donations, and I want to say thank you, but I, I really appreciate you all. But let me try to keep my thoughts straight, or I'm going to keep going on tangents. All right, so Marx, towards the latter half of Das Kapital, it gets into his utopian vision, right? And ironically, he glorifies the factories, he glorifies modern technology, he glorifies all the things that are the products of the capitalist system that he spent so much time criticizing. A lot of people wonder why he would do that. If he was really opposed to factories, if he really opposed to the enslavement of the businesses and these things, why would he create a utopian vision based on these things? Right? This is something to think about. It's because the real goal of these things was metaphysical. Marx believed that people were acting through the service of something else. The final thing that they were serving was God. And so if all of human history was directed and was a creation of a culture built on the belief in God, then you could only truly create a system, right? A man or civilization independent of external forces through the destruction of belief, tradition, culture, and so on. Marx believed in a new world through the creations of mankind, right? And this was the idea of going back to the Prometheus and these types of things, of forsaking what they would call the demiurge, the god of the world and the creator, who they did not believe was righteous. But that was they go into the whole belief on that. There was the Luciferian doctrine and so on. And communism was based in these things. I could spend hours talking about it. And yeah, I mean, you look at what they do, right? And so the idea of communism, destroy these things in a person, destroy religion, destroy morality, destroy the family, destroy all these things. And then Marx believed that once mankind has been liberated, quote unquote, from the chains of tradition, from the chains of belief, from the chains of past ideas and institutions, only then could mankind create a system and so on, built purely from mankind itself. Marx's vision of a future would have been something without morals, something without restraint, something without belief. And he believed that he believed that the creations of men themselves were of nature. Men being of nature, anything they make is of nature as well. That you could not create things technically artificial. And so, his utopian vision was based on these things. Going back to William Godwin again, the anarchists believe. So Marx talked about the 5 stages of civilization. The 4th stage, right? Capitalism, socialism, communism. The 4th stage. Oh, it's getting late. I'm sorry, guys. The 4th stage, socialism, is the state of the state capitalist monopoly. It's a state of dictatorship. You would need a totalitarian government in order to drive forward the destruction of human traditions, beliefs, cultures, traditions, and old ways of doing things. It's why socialist regimes brutalize religions and destroy culture and cultural relics. That's just what they do. It's part of the progressive, mindset towards the progressive goal of communism, along the idea of social evolution. That's the idea. That's what it is. And so the anarchists believe you could bypass the state of socialism. They believed you could bypass a state of socialism in order to achieve, intentional communism. That by internally destroying belief, by internally destroying morality, you could achieve that same goal without the necessity of socialism. That was the idea. And so that's what these things were based on. Yeah, anyways, sorry for the long tangent on that. Back to the main question on the Antifa and anarchists and so on. Now that I've explained how anarchism and communism are related. So the CCP did send out an alert ahead of these riots, giving orders to more than 200, I believe, communist organizations around the world, among them Communist Party USA and so on. These different communist organizations are involved in some of the movements behind these riots. For example, Freedom Road Socialists, Democratic Socialists of America does have some ties to them as well. DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, announced a program to coordinate national anti-fascist movements ahead of these riots. DSA was involved in a lot of this. And on the communist side directly, Freedom Road Socialists created as well. They brought back an organization that had been dismantled after this, I believe the 60s or 70s, focused on using race to incite communist revolution. That organization and front organizations of it were the ones that organized all the initial riots. Now, so you could say, based on some of their connections to the CCP, a lot of these, for example, were in fact front organizations of these different groups. And a lot of these different groups do, in fact, have ties to communism, to the Chinese Communist Party. A lot of them were Maoist organizations. Based on these things, China has had a role that we can't deny. How much of a role, to what extent, to what extent was it grassroots? Who knows? At the same time, again, these are the real people involved with it. I think there was also a very strong grassroots part of it. I also think there was a very strong opportunist role in it as well. And so I think we were seeing a few different things. Sorry for the very long answer to that question. I apologize, folks. I try to keep up thanking you for all your donations. It really helps this team a lot. Really, folks, all of you appreciate it. Sorry for the very long tangent, but hopefully I answered that question. Hopefully it was of use. It's getting late. Time goes by too quick with you guys. Fine at HQ, really appreciate the donation. Thank you. Dutch scene say, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Dude, your bookshelf, OMG. Need a roommate? I'll live in the library. Yeah, my wife tries to tell me to use the library more and to buy books less. But sometimes when I'm researching a topic, a lot of times the way I like to study history, the way I like to study topics, I don't like going off of what other people tell me. And so the way I research things is I trace it to its origin as far back as I can, and then I read books of its own systems at that time, and then I read articles and writings around it at that time, because I want to understand the cultural environment that the ideas emerged from. And then I trace it step by step up to the current time, and that's how I do a lot of my research. So these books here, and then some I have at the office, are my research on communism mostly. So some here are other stuff as well, but mostly going back into some of the freaky, you call them heresies or whatever, that were at the roots of it as well. Clithero, thank you for the donation. I enjoy your tangents, Joshua. Keep up what you're doing. Thank you. Glad to hear you all enjoy it, and I'm not getting too far out there. Andrew Anderson, appreciate the donation. Thank you. Joshua, thanks so much for your work and the work of Epoch. When am I going to see you on some more podcasts? I'd love to see you on with Tim Pool, Michael Malice, JRE, etc. We'll see. I haven't been doing as many shows lately. I do a lot of talk radio, actually. Not as much the past couple months, but for a while I was doing probably 3 different talk radio shows a week. I've done quite a few. I was on Steve Bannon's show. I did Valuetainment. I've done quite a few different channels, WION a few weeks back. I do quite a few. I'm probably not that good with keeping track of them and tweeting about them and stuff. I should probably do better with that. In fact, our promotional team would probably appreciate if I did. But yeah. Anyways, it sounds funny when it comes to a lot of technical stuff, like even like numbers. I'm not that good with them, to be honest. Keeping track of dates, I have to follow my calendar or I forget things. It's just not where my mind is at, and so I tend to do these podcasts, and then I tend to forget about them pretty quick afterwards. This Thursday, I might be going on Sons of History. I'm good friends with the guys who do it. They write for Epoch Times sometimes as well. So you want to watch a podcast I'm going to do, check out Sons of History this Thursday, I think 10 p.m. We're going to do a live, just one of them. All right, it's getting late. Sorry, folks. I'd love to talk all night. I enjoy it quite a bit. All right, let's see. So, Bill Nelson, why do you think China is being so hard on Inner Mongolia? Well, you're dealing with areas of China that have kept their traditional culture. The CCP is trying to wipe out traditional culture. I mean, when it comes down to it, same reason they're doing things in Tibet, same reason they're doing things in Xinjiang. They're trying to wipe out these traditional cultures, and it just so happens they have holdouts with it that they refuse to go along with. Inner Mongolia is part of that. Now, Greater Mongolia is still an independent country. The CCP controls part of it, being Inner Mongolia. It's not all of Mongolia. Again, cultural destruction. That's what they're doing. One sec. Dan Hickey, hey Josh, did you see the article from New York Times that disputes the connection between the Garza's Foundation and the pro-CCP organization? I have not read the New York Times article on it, but I think it was pretty indisputable. If you went, I checked it. And this was what the allegation was. If you went to the website of that BLM organization tied to Garza, and you click the donation link, it said directly on it. It went directly to the pro CCP website. It was directly on her website. You click it, it goes there. It stated it. I think it's bizarre if the New York Times was trying to cover that up, because it was pretty undeniable. Again, maybe there's something I'm not factoring in, but when you deal with a lot of these organizations, you have very ideologically motivated people who will use journalism to promote their own self-interest. You have a lot of that. And so, not saying absolutely that's what happened here. I didn't read the article, but you do have a lot of that. And so, again, if they're contesting the idea that that was the case, I did it myself. You go to the website, you click the donation link, it led directly to the CCP website, the pro CCP website. It was undeniable. But again, yeah, I didn't read the article. Maybe there's something they said I didn't factor in. LJL. What about the neutron bomb technology stolen by by Chinese from Los Alamos? I mean, yeah, they've been stealing nuclear technology from the get-go. The ability to build it is different. It's not clear how advanced China's nuclear weapons are, and they're pretty secretive with it. If I go into the whole system of how nuclear weapons work and stuff, and the whole history of development with it, I could talk for hours again. I had some good sources on this early on, including individuals who were, during the Cold War, monitoring Chinese communications, intelligence community folks. You can talk about the Amur Valley conflict, where Russia, the Soviets, and the Chinese Communist Party were fighting. You can talk about a lot of these things. Basically, the Chinese Communist Party had a different way of reverse engineering technology stolen from other countries. Their system of doing it was taking it from step 1, working up to step 10. The Soviets were starting at step 10 and trying to basically just develop it on the spot. The problem we have with nuclear technology is that generations of technology don't fit together well. And if you're having countries working together, Russia, China, Iran, others, developing different parts of these nuclear programs, and you're trying to piecemeal it together, it doesn't always work like they want it to. It's not as simple as they think. Even refinement of uranium and these types of things, it all plays a big role. It's very complicated stuff. My point in saying this is that just because they stole it doesn't mean they can build it. At the same time, China does have a very aggressive nuclear weapons program. They are developing these weapons. They are researching it. And just because they're not there yet doesn't mean they won't reach it. So I do think it is concerning based on that. Next question. So from SPK10T. Sorry if I'm reading that wrong. Appreciate the donation. Thank you. Hello from NYC. Is there a place where I can get info about the ruling families of the CCP? I think they were called the Black Dragon families. To be honest, I haven't I actually have never read a book that talks about them. I only know about the existence of the dragon families by talking to Chinese sources. Among many of them, it's just commonly accepted fact. I want to say there's 5 dragon families, black dragons being one of them. Um, these organizations are separate from the CCP. These are more like old family organizations that are within the power structures of the Chinese system, technically separate from the CCP. Different allegiances within the factions of the CCP. They do hold a lot of power in China. Now, on the surface, a lot of people will say, even within the CCP itself, it's not easy to rise in ranks. Even if you're serving the interests of the CCP, even if you're a low-level official, it's very hard to get a position if you're not born into it, which is kind of ironic because they're very openly a communist system. They're supposed to get rid of inheritance and these types of things. But any kind of late-stage socialist regime with a communist motive in its ideology, you almost always see this, which is one of the ironies of it, is that rather than progress along towards the goals of Marx, this is one of the things. People can talk all they want about how Marxism, that the ideas were okay and so on. It doesn't accomplish what it says it will accomplish. It accomplishes the opposite, which is one of the big ironies of it. We've seen it with every communist regime. It does not make people more free or more happy or anything. Yeah, it does not create wealth. It does not create success. The main reason I see is that it works by tearing down people who are wealthy or successful. It doesn't work on building people up. It creates equality by tearing down. You're not going to you're not going to make a prosperous society by just tearing down. You have to build up as well. And they find over and over again that these systems that they create, state-run companies, right, the state capitalist monopoly, that they don't get rid of the factories. They control the factories. They don't get rid of the things that people criticize about the capitalist systems. The only difference is that the state then controls it. And once the state controls it, you have all the problems of, one thing Ludwig von Mises notes, that when you subsidize failure, you don't have the natural ability of companies to fail. You have subsidized systems that are basically organized from the top, and so they're not sensitive to unique problems within the market. I don't want to go too deep into economics and stuff, but because there's no feedback system, right? There's no feedback system. You have failing industries that are sustained by government policy, and they just naturally fail over and over again. It creates misery. And one of the big ironies, going back to this, on the CCP, is that they're practicing communism, but they've moved back to this like agrarian feudal type system where you have power families running the country, and it's a generational power system, right? There's power dynamics based on what you're born into. Ironically, one of the things they talk about destroying. And so, it's what you see with late stage communist or more further along socialist systems. You see it every time. All right, folks. With that said, it's 11:33, and I try not to go over an hour, even though I feel like I could talk all night. I know there's a lot of questions I didn't get to. I do apologize for that, but yeah, I really enjoy talking with all of you. You ask great questions. I love talking with you guys. I go all night if I could, but for the sake of my team, sending me questions and stuff, let's end it soon. All right. So, anyways, folks, again, really appreciate the donations, even for those who can't. Really appreciate your ongoing support. I say it often. The growth of this channel has been incredible. I mean, I think 430,000 now. I think the last month alone, like 30,000 subscribers. I mean, it's incredible. I don't think highly enough, but I never expected it, and so it's been wonderful. And again, it's you folks here who've made that possible. And so genuinely, again, thank all of you. Yeah, thank you for the ongoing support. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to the team. And we're a pretty small team. I need to give them all credit one of these days or get them on camera with me. We have 2 video editors, one part-time person who helps with some of the channels at Epoch Times and NTD. And then I have a couple part-time researchers who do awesome work as well. And I'd love to have them on sometime. We could talk to all of you too. But anyways, folks, again, from me and the team here, genuinely, thank you all. Really means a lot to us, and really appreciate the ongoing support. And as always, that said, please take care of yourselves, stay healthy, stay free. Thank you.